Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Meaning and Mindfulness Google Hangout. Glad you could join us here. So, let me first describe this Hangout. It's going to be a conversation between myself, Gleb Tsipursky, the president of Intentional Insights, and I wrote a book called Find Your Purpose Using Science. So, it shares some science based strategies for finding meaning and purpose in life. And there's a lot of recent science behind this topic, which I share in the book and guide readers through the science, through the philosophy, and then through a series of worksheet exercises that help you find your personal sense of meaning and purpose and help you evaluate it and cultivate it over time. So that's the book. Now, what's Intentional Insights? I told you I'm president of that. Oh, I'm also a professor at Ohio State researching the history of science, focusing on psychology, cognitive neuroscience, and so on. And I specifically research meaning and purpose as one of my topics. So that's my academic background. Now, Intentional Insights is a nonprofit organization devoted to helping people reach their goals using science-based strategies. So various strategies derived from psychology, behavioral economics, cognitive neuroscience, from those dry, dense books that are pretty hard to read. And then it takes this material and adapts it to everyday life and shares strategies that you can easily use in your everyday life to improve your life. So that's what Intentional Insights is about. And my guest tonight, our guest tonight, has read the book, has prepared several questions about which we'll discuss, and he is from the Harvard community, humanist community, but I will let him introduce himself in the way that he knows best. So please go on.
Hi, I'm Rick Heller, and I lead meditations at the humanist community at Harvard. And we've been meeting for about 6 years, and we now actually have a book out called Secular Meditation, and it's our guide. It's been published by New World Library, and you can find it on Amazon.com and in fine bookstores. The humanist community at Harvard is a group that there's actually some professional staff involved. I'm a volunteer, but there's professional staff involved, and it serves the needs of people who are non-religious at Harvard University and in the Boston area. And meetings include talks on all sorts of subjects, and also activities such as a weekly meditation. And our meditations vary from meditations on the breath, ambient sound meditation, something called loving kindness meditation, and also we go into mindfulness practices, such as we recently had a mindful museum visit where we went to the Harvard Peabody Museum and practiced mindfulness while viewing exhibits. So meditation is this sort of focused concept where you're focusing your attention on just one thing, whereas mindfulness is a broader practice where you are paying attention to whatever is going on in the present moment, quite possibly using all your senses, and it also has a friendly, welcoming attitude, and that's what characterizes mindfulness. And so we find mindfulness as something that is consistent with the humanist idea, which humanists don't believe in sort of supernatural concepts, but we do believe in helping our fellow human being. Mindfulness is a way of it helps people who are suffering get to neutrality, and it also helps people who actually are neutral. It actually helps you achieve joy from in a moment-to-moment basis. Actually, one of the things I wanted to talk to Gleb about, though, is the sense of meaning, because I'm actually not sure that mindfulness provides meaning. And the first thing I wanted to talk to you about or ask you about, well, it was to discuss this paper I sent you by Angus Deaton and Daniel Kahneman, which discussed the question of, does money provide happiness? And to answer their question, they talked about two different aspects of happiness. And they're not the only people who talk about this. I've heard other people talk about this too, but they distinguish between moment-to-moment emotional well-being and this longer-term life evaluation. My claim in my book is that mindfulness is, in fact, the secret to moment-to-moment emotional well-being. But I don't know that it actually provides this life evaluation, this perhaps greater sense of purpose. So I claim that mindfulness is half the secret to happiness, but not necessarily the whole thing. And so I wonder what you thought about dividing this happiness between this moment-to-moment concept and this longer-term concept, and where your ideas fit in with that.
All right, thank you, Rick. And mindfulness is indeed a valuable concept. I actually meditate every day, and funnily enough, I meditated before our phone call to prepare for it. I think mindfulness and meditations, particularly as Rick describes it, is quite useful for getting more focused, for becoming calm, and for a whole variety of things. Now, specifically to Rick's question on meaning and purpose and its relation to mindfulness. There is, what the science on meaning and purpose shows is that there are three broad areas that are evidence-based strategies for getting a sense of meaning and purpose. And so one of those strategies is self-reflection. So self-reflection on meaning and purpose in life, on one's meaning and purpose in life. A second strategy is community and social bonds, so getting community and social bonds with others. And a third strategy is serving others in whatever ways you feel speaks to you and that engages others. And this is all described in my book, of course, Find Your Purpose Using Science, which is available on the Intentional Insights website, intentionalinsights.org, as well as Amazon. Now, specifically to mindfulness. In the book itself, I talk about mindfulness as one means of finding meaning and purpose in life. But it's not simple mindfulness. It's not just watching your breath. It's a specific form of mindfulness where you reflect on your meaning and purpose in life in a visualization. So visualizations are a specific form of mindfulness, which Rick might talk more about in his response, but it's a specific form of mindfulness where you visualize a certain idea, a certain concept, a certain visual imagery. So how this would work with meaning and purpose? I'll give you an example. Now, a sense of meaning and purpose, what the research literature suggests that it comes from, the sense of meaning and purpose, is from having a long-term orientation and a broad purpose in life, a broad goal in life. So having a sense that your life has a broad goal that you're striving toward, and that informs your everyday activities. So a broad overarching aspiration to which you're moving toward throughout your life. So that is what the literature describes as, the scientific literature describes as that sense of meaning and purpose. We can gain that through mindfulness, and specifically through a form of meditation where we visualize what it would look like for our life to have that broad sense of overarching motivation that comes from having a long-term goal, a long-term aspiration which we're moving towards. And then trying to envision what that aspiration could be and reflect within ourselves, because this aspiration must come at the end from ourselves. What the research on meaning and purpose suggests is that it's all self-created. So it doesn't come from any external divinity or any external cultural tradition. It's all what we perceive it to be. So it comes from within ourselves. There is no objective sense of meaning and purpose. It's all subjective. So as part of that visualization, trying to visualize what we internally perceive could be a long-term goal and aspiration of ours. And then building back from that goal to the sense, the emotions that we would get if we see ourselves moving toward that long-term goal and visualizing what would be the emotional experience, what would be the sensory everyday life experience we would have. So Rick mentioned mindfulness as being aware in the moment. And we can be aware in the moment that we are, in each moment, moving toward that long-term goal. So what would it be like to experience that sense of awareness and connection to that long-term goal, that long-term aspiration that we're moving toward? So that is a specific visualization, and the details are described in my book. I won't go into them right now, but that is the kind of thing that can help use that where meditation, more specifically and more narrowly and more broadly, mindfulness, awareness can be used to achieve a richer and greater sense of meaning and purpose. Does that answer your question, Rick?
Yeah, it actually connects with one of the meditations in the book. I have 32 mindfulness practices in the book, and most of them are focused on being in the present moment. And as you know, when mindfulness is often defined as paying attention in a non-judgmental way to what is going on in the present moment. And oftentimes people interpret that to mean that you can't think about the future, because often thinking about the future brings up anxious thoughts and stresses, and indeed part of stress reduction is not necessarily thinking about future scenarios that may never happen, that are fearful and things like that. And being anchored to what is going on in the present moment kind of helps alleviate that. But people sometimes ask, does that mean I can't plan for the future? So I actually do have a meditation in the book I call intentional daydreaming. And it's based on it's a paper I read by Singer, which was called, I think it was called Ode to Positive Constructive Daydreaming or something like that. And the authors discuss that there's different ways of thinking about the future. It talks about this question of mind wandering, and is mind wandering bad? And sometimes mind wandering is bad, is if, for instance, you're working on your homework and all these just thoughts, you just can't pay attention, you're finding it bored, and you're thinking about TV and things like that. So that kind of mind wandering is not very functional. And then there's also the sort of mind wandering where you're ruminating, where your inner voice is very critical, and that is not just dysfunctional, but that can be hurtful. But there's actually a way of positive mind wandering where you are thinking about the future. But one of the things I say is that it's probably best to do that intentionally when you want to do it, so that if you're taking a test in your class and you got 60 minutes to do the test, that's not the time to daydream about your future visions. Just like answer the questions on the test. But you may at times want to take an intentional moment or half an hour or so where you actually do exactly what Gleb, what you are saying, envisioning your possibilities for the future. So that kind of mind wandering where you are actually trying to envision the future, I think, can be very useful. That's sort of, you might say that's mindfulness 2.0, because the mindfulness 1.0 is just really being anchored in the present moment. But mindfulness, when you get to more complex levels, you can actually be mindful of your thoughts. So you can actually be thinking about the future and sort of also have an observer inside yourself that is noticing those thoughts. And so that, in that sense, that is mindfulness. But generally, that's not how I talk about mindfulness at first. These are things that are in sort of the later chapters of the book, because I kind of have the foundation first of being anchored in the present moment. But yes, you definitely addressed what I was asking. So I'd like to get onto something else now, which is, it's connected to that, which is in Buddhist philosophy, there's a term called dukkha, which is often translated as suffering. And it can be the suffering that comes, for instance, from physical pain. It can be the suffering that comes from emotional pain. But there also seems to be something else, a kind of existential suffering. It's often, it's described that even when things are all right, or when you're happy, there's still some sort of little undertone of shall we say, emptiness, that even in life's amid life's pleasures, that there's something missing. And I wonder if that is actually connected to the long-term sense of meaning, because the word hedonism actually can have a few different meanings, but the sort of most simple meaning is, we think of a hedonistic lifestyle, which is just people having enjoying things in the present moment, in terms of often consumption of things, food, gluttony, and things like that. And that's the sort of thing that you're having pleasure, but there's a sort of emptiness toward it. There's still this undercurrent of lack of satisfaction. And I think that's because of a lack of meaning. So I guess I would have you then address that. That is this long-term, lacking a long-term sense of meaning, would you agree, can produce suffering even in the presence of consumer goods that otherwise should make people happy?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question. We in our society, in Western capitalist society, are very often driven by consumerism. Consumerism is considered to be the underpinning of our society. And indeed, about two-thirds of our spending is, two-thirds of our economy is driven by consumer spending. So our economy works based on consumerism. Consumerist economy is often a big challenge for people in trying to be happy. So you mentioned the paper by Kahneman at the beginning of the conversation. And there's a lot of research showing that how we consume doesn't actually bring us the kind of rewards that we hope it will bring us. We anticipate that buying something will cause us to feel happiness, to feel joy, to feel enjoyment. But that joy, that feeling of joy, is very short-lived. And we very much, as human beings, underestimate the impact, or let me rephrase, we overestimate the impact of buying something. And we underestimate the impact of focusing on what actually gives us the satisfaction, would give us satisfaction in the long term. So buying a new, let's see, a new wallet, or a new clothing, or a new computer gadget will seem very satisfying to us, but it will not really make us happy in the long run. Whereas things that are not inherently pleasurable, the research shows are actually quite often more satisfying. So, for example, spending time with your loved ones is not necessarily something we associate as with joyousness, with pleasure, the same sort of pleasure that we would get from buying a new computer gadget or having a satisfying meal. So that immediate visceral pleasure. But spending time with loved ones, with people who constitute our community, is shown by research to contribute to our sense of meaning and purpose and life satisfaction over time. So that is one example where the research shows that cultivating those social bonds is more important for our sense of meaning and purpose, as well as happiness in the long run. Another example is serving others. So again, if we consider, do we want to spend time, how do we spend our time in our everyday life? Do we want to spend time going to, let's say, go for that enjoyable dinner that we mentioned? Or if we want to go and have a luxurious spa treatment for ourselves, or something like that, or go shopping, versus spend our time volunteering in a soup kitchen, or spend our money donating to a charity like Give Directly, which will help poor people in Kenya have better lives. The research shows that what will actually give us a sense of meaning and purpose and happiness is serving others, not serving ourselves. It doesn't seem intuitive, does it? it seems intuitive that the visceral, immediate satisfaction from buying a nice toy or a nice meal will be better for us. But it's really not. It's counterintuitive, and that's what the research shows. That's why we need things like intentional insights to explain what the research actually shows about what gives us meaning and purpose and happiness in the long run, because it's not the same thing that you might think gives us meaning and purpose.
Yeah. So, and then this is now I would say a comment. I don't know if you have. It's not really a question exactly, but just my experience. I've had a hard time combining both the sort of short-term rewards and this longer-term sense of satisfaction in my work. So one area I have worked in is government, and in that case, I was in a job that was intended to contribute to public welfare, and I think it did. However, on a moment-to-moment or even day-to-day basis, it was very frustrating. It was very hard to see whether what I was doing was really contributing in the way I hoped to. But in general, it was kind of there was sort of a legalistic process to it, and it was quite dry. So I would say, overall have a sense of meaning and purpose in that job, but the moment-to-moment rewards were a bit lacking. Another job I've done a lot of is computer programming, and in computer programming, I like it on a moment-to-moment basis. I mean, it can be frustrating once in a while when the program doesn't do exactly what you want, but overall, one of the nice things about computer programming is that you slowly build something, and there are rewards, let's say every few hours when you fix one little problem, and it gets better and better. And so it can be rewarding on I would say, hour-to-hour basis. And yet, oftentimes I do that, and I sort of have this overall sense of what is this really contributing toward? I mean, it has to do with, it depends upon the job. These were corporate jobs, whatever, and I was, you have to pay the bills. So I'm doing them, and on a moment-to-moment basis, it's enjoyable, but sometimes I sort of feel, what is it really contributing toward? And I have yet to find something that is both, well, I guess three things. The one thing I do actually probably find both that I enjoy on a moment-to-moment basis, and I find long-term enjoyment, is writing. But so far, that's not all that financially sustainable. I can't, it doesn't pay as well as either computer programming or working for the government. So my point is, it can be very difficult, I think, to find work that is both has meaning and purpose. It also has moment-to-moment rewards and is financially sustainable. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
That's a very valuable question, Rick. I think work, so I talk in the book about finding meaning and purpose in the workplace, and there's a couple of chapters on that. And it specifically addresses the question of how to find meaning and purpose in your work, even if that work is not intuitively satisfying, immediately satisfying, either in the moment to moment or in the long term. For example, most people don't enjoy jobs such as being janitors. I was speaking to a close friend of mine who's a janitor, and he was saying how that's not a job he enjoys or that his colleagues enjoy. They do it just for the money.
Right.
So whether you do programming for the government or for large corporations, or you do blue-collar work such as janitorial service, it's not a job that is inherently meaningful and satisfying. But we can make all jobs more meaningful and satisfying through several ways. One of these ways is through applying the three basic strategies that I discussed, through applying self-reflection, community bonds, and serving others, which are the three science-based ways of finding meaning and purpose in whatever domain you are engaging in. So in the domain of self-reflection, for example, in a corporate job where you work for, let's say, something like a telephone company. Let's use that example. then you can stop every so often and think about the broader purpose of what you do and connect it to how it serves others. So, for example, a telephone company helps people connect all over the world. Right now, you and I are connecting online, and that's one way of connecting. But of course, telephone is another way of connecting. And it's really meaningful for a lot of people, of course, to connect with their loved ones through the telephone. And people are enabled to have that source of connection through the work that you do, programming various things that enable the company to provide the service that people then get that sense of connection from. So, in a sense, you are serving others through your work in doing programming for a telephone company. So that connects to the broader overarching strategy of looking at what are the broader aspirations moving you. And the broader aspiration there is helping serve others by providing them that service in that everyday level. So it connects to what we talked about earlier, a sense of mindfulness. While mindfulness relates to being aware of in the moment of one's senses, I also think it relates to being aware of where one is in society and in life. And just being aware of that in the moment, just cognizant, that voice that you talked about, that metacognitive voice. And noticing one's thoughts is spoken of as metacognition. Meta meaning above, and cognition meaning thoughts. So being aware above of your thoughts, from above of your thoughts. And so being aware of where you are, of where your senses are, of what you're doing and why you're doing it, being conscious of it in every moment and connected to that broader overarching goal helps us gain that sense of meaning and purpose. And you're being self-reflective about it, which is another science-based strategy of gaining meaning and purpose. So that would be the specific thing I would suggest for a job that involves something like programming, which is usually a solitary job. If a job may involve things that involve engaging with coworkers, that's a way of building community. So, which is another way of helping people find meaning and purpose and cultivate their sense of meaning and purpose. And that I would talk about that if the job involved something like engaging with one's coworkers, which my close friend's job did as being a janitor. He has a number of coworkers he engages with, as well as students. So he's a janitor at OSU, where I'm a professor. So that way, that's another strategy, but that I'm not going to talk about it right now in depth because it doesn't seem to relate to programming that much. Do you think that addresses your question, Rick?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. So sometimes, yeah, in Buddhist philosophy, there's something called right livelihood, which is, one does need to make a livelihood, and putting that into the context and and I think, there's some jobs that are obviously really great and obviously helpful to people, and then there are some jobs that seem sort of neutral, and like working for the telephone company, you sort of think, okay, that's sort of neutral. And then obviously there are also some jobs that are harmful, let's say, but hopefully people will avoid those. But most jobs probably are neutral, or they do help people. A farmer needs to grow food, and we need to eat. One doesn't think of that as being necessarily a idealistic kind of job, but putting it into a context of people need to eat. Sees that it is a form of right livelihood. So yeah, I think that's a helpful idea. So now I'd like to ask you about long-term goals now, and I think it is good to have a long-term goal, but clinging to a goal. So basically, I should say something about I'm referenced Buddhism. Our secular humanist view is influenced by Buddhist philosophy. I don't consider myself to be a Buddhist, but I'm influenced by Buddhist philosophy, and I believe that a lot, but not all of Buddhist philosophy has validity that can be put in, let's say, scientific terms. So one of the ideas of Buddhist philosophy is that clinging to a goal that is out of reach can lead to suffering. So I'd say Buddhists do believe that you ought to have goals, but that you hold on to the goals lightly, and you have a sense of equanimity so that if you don't achieve the goal, you are not, it doesn't throw you into suffering. And that if you achieve the goal, actually it's pleasant, but you're actually, the idea is actually you don't get so thrilled by it too. You try to get a sense of equanimity that you achieve the goal, it's nice, but you don't get too excited too, because that makes it too much of a high stakes sort of thing. So I guess my question would be your thought about what should be one's stance toward achieving a goal, or is it actually the journey that is the reward, and that maybe you don't actually even have to achieve the goal, but that you're actually making progress toward the goal?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question and a very important thing to consider, and it depends on the semantics of goals. When I talk about long-term goals, and I describe this in more depth in the book, Find Your Purpose Using Science, which is available on the Intentional Insights website and on Amazon. The Intentional Insights website is intentionalinsights.org. Now, when I speak of long-term goals, I speak of not specific projects that you achieve. So for example, for a high school student achieving graduation, or for a worker achieving promotion to the next level, or something like that. I speak of things that are broader, more vague, and more aspirational. And they are process goals. So it's a different type of goal. It's a process goal. It's how you want to live your life. So let me give an example of my process goals, of my long-term goals. And my long-term goals are to have a life that is happy, fulfilled, and flourishing. So happy, fulfilled, and flourishing. And then I give people for the book a way of describing what those mean for them. I give them a number of adjectives they can use to describe their long-term goals, and you can of course come up with your own. And then I have them use a sentence to define what each adjective means for them. So for me, happiness means a sense of contentment and satisfaction throughout my life, and a sense that my satisfaction, contentment with my life will grow as I grow older. So that's happiness for me. Then fulfillment for me is a systematic sense that I am fulfilling my own personal values, which may shift and change over time. And I'm fulfilling them toward myself, toward people close to me, and toward my personal and global community. And for example, intentional insights is a way of doing me fulfilling my values to the broader community through helping as a nonprofit organization. So it's a nonprofit mission to help people improve their lives through having better patterns of thinking, feeling, and behavior in order to reach their own goals. And a sense of flourishing. So a sense of, for me, flourishing relates to a sense of thriving and wellness in all of my life areas. And I divide my life into 5 areas. My self-life areas, that's things concerning me. My life partnership area concerning my wife and fellow Intentional Insights co-founder, Agnes Vishnevkin, who's the love of my life. Then my social circle, so friends who are close to me. Then my professional activities, so my academic activities, and by that time also my Intentional Insights activities, and various civic activities I engage in. So I engage in things like the Humanist Community of Central Ohio, which is the local equivalent of the the Humanist Community at Harvard, of the First Unitarian Universalist Church, and other various civic causes that I serve. And so I want a sense of wellness and thriving in each of those areas, and a sense that my wellness and thriving in each of those areas will grow larger in the future. So that is the sort of aspirational process goals that I talk about. It's not achieving any one of them in a distinct way that can be said, oh, I have achieved it definitely. There are various sub-projects which will help me achieve those things. So for example, this Google Hangout helps me achieve the goal of civic service, so through engaging with the humanist community at Harvard, and also professional through doing stuff relating to intentional insights, which overlaps the civic and the professional area for me. So that sense of suffering from not achieving a goal, or that sense of momentary pleasure from achieving a goal, is not a component of long-term goal achievement in this system of thinking. Back to you, Rick.
All right, that's interesting. So yeah, it's a process or the journey, I would say, rather than a specific goal in that sense. And there's certain values like integrity that I would see that you would see as important in that.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'd like to shift a little bit to this idea of politics and social change activism. I think for a lot of people, and particularly people in the humanist community, it does give them a sense of meaning and purpose. And actually for me, I grew up actually in Orthodox Judaism. And when I stopped believing, I actually became politically active. And I've sort of in a very conscious way, I actually made this shift that I felt that I needed something to believe in, something to try to accomplish. So I'm wondering what you think of political activism as a shift. So one of the things I actually experienced as a religious person, when I was religious, praying 3 times a day was something that in my metaphysical belief was actually something that was very important, that it wasn't just prayer can actually help your actually moment-to-moment emotions. That's definitely the case. But there was also kind of a larger sense that it was part of this cosmic scheme that by praying 3 times a day, I was advancing that. So I could actually be somehow changing the world metaphysically without even doing anything that other people would even notice. But once if you stop believing in heaven, I think there's a tendency to want to create a heaven on earth, a sort of utopia, or to make things more perfect. And so I do think a lot of political activism and even the orientation of the humanist community toward political activism is this idea that we want to improve things. And since we don't believe that things can improve magically through things like, let's say, prayer, we need to go out there and do it. But, I think there's some value, I think there's obviously value in making the world a better place, just for that purpose. But I think a lot of it is actually not just for that, but is actually as people have a need for a purpose, they find it in that. But I think also that here's a problem where they often cling to goals and become very depressed when things don't go in that direction, or in fact, maybe things go in the wrong direction. So that can be quite depressing. So I'm basically asking, what do you think about politics and social change activism as the main way to get your meaning and purpose in life?
I think that relates very well to the theme of serving others. So I talk in the book about both civic engagement and political engagement as 2 areas where we, as reason-oriented people, can deeply engage with the world and serve others well. So let's talk about political engagement first, since that's the thing that you brought up first, Rick. I think political engagement is very much a way of serving others. It's thinking about how can others benefit from my work in the world? How can I make a positive impact in other people's lives? There's so much negativity in politics. There's so many ways that people don't think about reason and science as the basis for political engagement. They make decisions based on cultural traditions, based on, there's certainly a lot of religious fundamentalism, which you mentioned, kind of coming from that religious background, which doesn't serve people well because it's not informed by science. And we know things like statistics on abstinence-only education that shows that scientifically, when you look at the actual statistics and the data, abstinence-only education does not work nearly as well at preventing abortions as does education on how to have sex safely, or even, in terms of having sex, abstinence-only education is not really effective in preventing people from having sex. There's a common bias. So this is one of the concepts from Intentional Insights, and it's a psychologically informed concept called reactance bias. When people, especially young people, are told things by adults, such as don't have sex,
Uh-huh.
they tend to not listen to those adults. And it
Uh-huh.
actually increases their likelihood of having sex. And this is, yes, this is a fundamental problem with the abstinence-only education that's really not scientifically based at all. So so we can, as reason-oriented people who are guided by science and evidence, pursue scientifically informed courses in our decision-making in politics, and that way serve other people well. And that is the goal, that is the end goal of finding meaning and purpose and growing more happy as well. Now, that's political engagement. Civic engagement is in many ways less controversial, and it may be a better fit for people who don't are not inclined to do things that might get others riled up. So that's civic engagement. And civic engagement can range from so many things. You can go and volunteer in a local soup kitchen. You can go and be an activist in your local humanist community of Harvard or Central Ohio. And both Rick is a volunteer at the Harvard community of the Harvard humanist community and leading the meditation group there. And I understand that very well. That's a great form of volunteering. In fact, I used to lead a meditation group here at the Humanist Community of Central Ohio before some other folks took it over from me, and I focused on intentional insights as my civic engagement as well as professional work. So that's one thing you can do: volunteer for a local faith-based, kind of, ideologically informed group, volunteer for a local soup kitchen, volunteer for a local hospital, whatever you can do. Now, when you contribute your money, we as reason-oriented, science-based people want to focus on how we can contribute our money in the most effective fashion, in the most data-driven, evidence-based fashion. And so there are really good charity evaluators, such as givewell.org or thelifeyoucansave.org, which orient toward evaluating charities based on how well those charities perform and how impactful they are. So they take the data and they actually evaluate these things. And they can give you really good guidance on which charity to donate to if you want to make the most impact on saving human lives, if that's your end goal. I mean, it depends. Some people don't have that as their end goal. I think most humanists tend to, because we value humanity. But it's whatever you choose to be your own end goal, whatever goal you're trying to pursue. So again, that's givewell.org and thelifeyoucansave.org. I think I mentioned Give Directly as one of those charities that you can give, and Against Malaria Foundation is another well-known one. So those are some ways to engage civically in a way that contributes to your community, and as well as engage politically in a way that contributes to your community, the broader national community, all as a means of serving others and therefore gaining a richer sense of meaning and purpose in life.
Right. Yeah. So now in your book, you cite studies that show that having a sense of meaning leads to better health outcomes. And that's not intuitively obvious to me. So the question is why? Is it a matter of reducing stress, or does it reduce behaviors like alcoholism, which might occur when you don't have a sense of purpose? And also in terms of mental health, perhaps having a sense of purpose helps you put up with suffering because you think the sacrifices are worth it. So, but basic question is, could you clarify to me why the sense of meaning leads to better health outcomes?
Sure, happy to do that. It really does lead to better health outcomes. So there's been studies showing that people have less strokes, less heart attacks, less Alzheimer's disease, less of various ulcers and various other conditions. Because basically our brains are very much connected to the rest of our bodies. So we are very much influenced, our physical health is very much influenced by our minds, our mental health, and of course, and meaning and purpose, sense of meaning and purpose influences both mental health and physical health. So let me talk about mental health first. People, studies show, are much less likely to engage in dangerous and risky behaviors, such as alcoholism, using drugs, and plenty of other things if they have a sense of meaning and purpose. This is especially the case for youth and young adults. So they are less likely to engage in various risky behaviors. Now, people also have a greater sense of well-being and satisfaction on an everyday level. So that's just what the research shows. So you're happier, you're healthier, you're more mentally healthier, you're more satisfied on an everyday level, and a sense of meaning and purpose leads you to seek out the kind of activities that would lead you to be mentally healthier. For example, walking, and doing various sorts of exercises. You're more likely to do that if you have a strong sense of meaning and purpose. You're more likely to have a healthier lifestyle of all sorts, and you're more likely to have a meaningful community support if you have greater sense of meaning and purpose, which again correlates with and results in greater mental health. It also correlates with and results in greater physical health. So if we feel better mentally, that has an impact throughout our bodies. And we are not quite sure of all the mechanisms involved in that. One definite mechanism that is there is cortisol, which is the hormone that is produced by stress. So Rick is right. You have less stress if you have a higher sense of meaning and purpose, and therefore you have less cortisol. And you really want to have less cortisol. Cortisol is bad for a lot of your bodily organs. It's bad for your stomach. It's causes ulcers, really causes unpleasant things in your stomach. It degrades your brain. It's for your brain. Basically, people who are stressed have less mental capacity. It just simply does that. It wears for your brain cells, for your neurons, and has a variety of other degrading impacts on the rest of your body. So you want to get rid of cortisol as quickly as possible. Mindfulness meditation is one way of doing that. So that is something I strongly recommend doing for dealing with cortisol. And on a broader overarching scale, having a sense of meaning and purpose reduces cortisol. Also, physical health is you gain physical health from that healthy lifestyle, which you're likelier to lead if you have a greater sense of meaning and purpose. So people who don't have a strong sense of meaning and purpose are less likely to do exercises, less likely to have a healthy diet, less likely to engage in a variety of other things which lead to physical health. And they are more people who have a low sense of meaning and purpose are more likely to have strokes and heart attacks and so on. So this is a science that basically suggests that anyone who wants to be healthy mentally or physically should really work on their sense of meaning and purpose as one area of work for them.
Okay, so one question, something I read in your book which surprised me, and I'd like a little bit more clarification on, is that, and maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but you seem to report that intrinsic spirituality was not associated with a sense of meaning, and I found this puzzling because I know there's some research that shows that people who seek extrinsic rewards from, let's say, shopping and consumerism, things like that, have maybe are actually overall less happy than people who have find intrinsic rewards. So perhaps I was reading you wrong. It seemed to me I understand that part of your idea of the sense of meaning comes from having a sense of community and connecting with others. But it seemed kind of very sort of extroverted. I consider myself an introvert, and I sort of sometimes sort of see the sense of community, in some so for instance, some houses of worship, in my experience, there's a sort of sense of clubbiness to it, that people go to it not necessarily because they actually, let's say, believe in God or believe in the religion, but it's part of the community sort of thing. And so I was actually a little surprised to read that you were emphasizing kind of what I interpret to be more extrinsic things than having this sort of intrinsic sense. But maybe I'm reading you wrong.
Yeah, I hear you, Rick. And I'm also an introvert. And it's actually not that great news for us introverts. So the way our brain is wired, so how evolutionary biology has chosen to wire us, our brain is to be social animals. And our brains give us hormonal rewards. And a really good book about this is Social Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. They basically give us intrinsic rewards, hormones that cause us to be happier and healthier if we spend time with other people. Again, not great news for us introverts, but it's true. So people who do spirituality, do religion inside their home, separate from others, and there are a number of people who do that. They don't report on the research and the literature a higher sense of meaning and purpose, or they report a lower sense of meaning and purpose than people who have the same level of spirituality, spiritual engagement. They spend the same time in their spiritual engagement and so on, but they do so in a community setting. So that is evidence, pretty clear evidence, that it's not a religion that brings about a sense of meaning and purpose, but community. And as you mentioned, plenty of people go to houses of worship and engage with religious activities more for the sense of community, or completely for the sense of community, as opposed to a sense of ideological faith in the canons, in whatever they're being preached. So basically, it shows, we see that those people are following the path that is evolutionarily impregnated in our brains. They are doing the things that will cause them to have better health and a better sense of meaning and purpose, more happiness. So it just is the case. So that's unfortunately some bad news for us introverts.
That's interesting. I have to think about that a little bit more. So, I mean, I wonder, in a lot of, I actually am not on the path of these retreats where, people actually go off for several months by themselves, and which are very solitary sort of thing. My meditation is, I meditate every day, but I'm not trying to get to a very concentrated state that requires the absence of other people. But also, I suppose it might depend upon the individual. I mean, people are, shall we say, wired differently, and I wonder if some people. So just briefly, then, I guess, would you have any thoughts about, in terms of literature? Overall, what you said is true, but is it possible that difference between the introvert and extrovert is actually that different sense of reward, and some people may find the, I don't know, 6-week silent retreat to be very meaningful, where others would be driven crazy by it?
So that's a good question. Our brains certainly have some differentiation, and there are people who are intrinsically introverted, like I and Yurik, and people who are intrinsically extroverted. It may be the case that people who are extroverted get less hormonal pleasure. We might be introverted because we get less hormonal satisfaction from various parts of our brain that come from interacting with others. But regardless of the case, meaning and purpose, so that sense of meaning and purpose, is correlated with community. Mm-hmm. So on the baseline, the average person is much less likely to experience meaning and purpose by themselves than in a community. So if we, unless we have very clear knowledge of ourselves and that we don't experience meaning and purpose in community, we should probably seek out the experience of community in order to have a sense of meaning and purpose. Fortunately, community doesn't need to mean a large crowd of people. It can be as much as one other person. So as an introvert, I gain much more from communicating and engaging with one person than with a large group of people. And that's definitely a bond in experience. So building up that social bond for one-on-one engagement. And that's certainly that, I prioritize. Let me say it this way. I have become, I have come to spend more time with people. I chose intentionally to do so after I learned about the research on meaning and purpose and how much benefits I get, even though it doesn't feel intuitive to me as an introvert, from spending time with other people. So just from a research-based, science-based perspective, I chose to shift my behavior based on what the science showed. And that's generally the kind of thing that intentional insights advocates. You know, shifting your behavior, shifting your patterns of thinking and feeling from those that feel intuitive to us to those that are actually research backed. If the research and our intuitions don't agree, because our intuitions are actually a poor guide for what serves us best.
Okay, so yeah, so in my book, Secular Meditation, I actually lead off with a loving kindness meditation. It's also known as metta with two T's, METTA. And it's something where you actually, it's aimed to actually make you feel warmer toward other people. And actually, my own experience, it actually does make me a little bit more extroverted. So the meditation itself, you start off by thinking about someone who, when you think about this person, it makes you have warm feelings. And then you also think about yourself, and then you expand the circle to include what we call neutral person. And I often use the person, I say the person who served you coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. That's an East Coast coffee chain, and not everybody has that. But just a neutral person, a person you don't really know very well, but you think about that person in a warm way. And then actually, another step is actually thinking about a difficult person, for instance, a coworker who irritates you, for instance, and to make you feel a little bit more warmly toward them. But this is a meditation that when you actually do it in the formal process, you have your eyes closed and you're doing it as a meditation. But there is this, well, there's definitely some scientific research that shows that it elevates mood. I'm not actually sure that there's any scientific research that it makes you more compassionate to other people. But I personally, I do think it does make me friendlier. And I cite in the book a case of I went to a talk by, it was actually Bill McKibben of 350.org, the environmental group, was giving a talk. And just before the talk, there was some food being served. And I was waiting in line. And I didn't know the people around me, but I just actually, and being introverted, I wasn't going to start a conversation. They weren't talking to me or whatever, but I actually just did the little meta thing. You use the phrases like, I'd like to be safe. I'd like to be healthy. I'd like to be happy. I'd like to be at ease in the world. And after I did that, I actually struck up a conversation with the person in front of me who turned out to be a blogger, Wen Stevenson. He's actually an author too, and also an environmentalist, who I actually knew who he was. I never met him before. I didn't know what he looked like, but when we actually had a conversation, I'd actually read his blog. So it actually had made me more extroverted. So I would recommend metta or loving kindness meditation for this purpose of helping a person who isn't really all that social to make social connections and enjoy the social connections. Because I do think mindfulness of breath meditation can be a bit solitary, and I'm not sure that it will necessarily make you more social. But anyway, the loving kindness meditation is something that can make you more social. So actually, my question, and I'd say this is my final question, is what kind of meditations do you do?
Huh, good question. So let me first comment on your previous, the loving kindness meditation. Loving kindness meditation. So I know a little bit about of the research around it, and it has been shown in recent studies to increase feelings of compassion and empathy towards others and behaviors of being more socially oriented. So people who do loving kindness are more compassionate and empathetic and are more likely to engage with others. So there is research showing that that is the case. Um, my personal meditations. So I like to do the meditation of state of being, which is basically sitting there. It's a complex meditation. It's not for beginners. It's just sitting there and emptying one's mind of all thoughts, not focusing on anything at all. So I will not give the formal name of it, the the Buddhist name, just for lack of confusion. I like to give the English language name. So just state of being. It's just sitting there and emptying one's mind of all thoughts and dismissing all thoughts. I find it to be a very restorative form of meditation. Whenever I get tired and my mind gets mentally foggy, it's a very relaxing and restorative form of meditation because just not thinking about anything is very freeing and liberating. So that's the one I turn to most frequently, and I can do it for brief periods of as short as a minute and as long as a while. So it depends. But that's something that's my go-to meditation. I also do body scans. So feeling various aspects of my body and where they are in the world and how they feel and so on. So I do body scans. That's pretty frequent for me. I do various sorts of visualizations. I mentioned one visualization on finding meaning and purpose. I often do visualizations that are connected to my research, to the research and the methods of intentional insights, which have to do with reminding myself to deal with the various thinking errors that my brain commits. Everyone's brain commits. So just the way that our brain is wired. So for example, our brain is wired to react very quickly emotionally to any signs of aggression and to be anxious and stressed out by it. So I remind myself that this is just a factor of our brain, and I don't need to be anxious by various things that appear to be anxiety producing. So, because our brain evolved in a savanna environment where we needed to protect ourselves against saber-toothed tigers and be really anxious when they jumped out of the grass. But we don't have those sorts of things in today's world. We instead need to protect ourselves against emails that we don't know what kind of information they contain and that may inspire anxiety, or people who don't respond to our emails and then we're anxious about why they didn't respond, or any number of things. I just use the email as an example. So another reminder I have for myself is to be very open to changing my mind based on new information. Our minds are inherently they're biologically evolved to not respond nearly as quickly as they should in the face of new information and to update our beliefs, change our minds based on new information. So that's a visualization I have to update my beliefs based on new information. Another
So
visualization I have.
could you describe that in greater depth? Because that sounds
Sure,
interesting. I don't know about it.
sure, sure. So I sit down and in a meditative pose. Um, Not always. Sometimes I do it as a walking meditation, but usually as in a meditative pose. And I remind myself in a textual format, so it's text and voice that I see in my brain, that it's a little bit of a mantra, so a chant where I remind myself that everyone's brains, including mine, are wired with various thinking errors. And one of these thinking errors, the research talks about it as confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is a thinking error where the previous information that we already have causes us to interpret new information that we have in a biased way to conform to our previous information. For example, if we are anti-gun control, if we want to, not control guns, information about a shooting in a school will cause us to believe that we need to allow all school children to have guns and carry guns to prevent shooters. So that's a way, regardless of what the science says, regardless of if there's been studies showing that actually it's much more effective to just have the police have guns and not, have school children have guns. So that's a typical example of a confirmation bias. And so I remind myself that, my brain is wired to have confirmation bias about any new information, and that I want to give a special weight, 50% more weight, to information that goes against my current beliefs, just because I know my brain is wired to be, set against information that goes against my beliefs and my preferences. And then I remind myself that I want to be very open to constructive critical feedback from others, even though it doesn't feel very good to get feedback that's, oh, I'm doing something wrong. If any of you viewers see me doing something that's you think can be improved in this Google Hangout, I welcome you to let me know at gleb@intentionalinsights.org. That's my email, gleb@intentionalinsights.org. Most people wouldn't want that sort of feedback. They wouldn't want, an opportunity for improvement, but I really do, because I know that that's the best way for me to improve, is getting feedback from others, regardless of how negative it may be. So I'd be really grateful for any feedback. So that's the type of information that I remind myself in my brain that I welcome, and that it's going to be good for me in the long term, even though it may feel negative and anxiety inducing in the short term to have that sort of information. And then I lead myself out of that meditation through breath awareness usually. So that's the kind of visualization I do to remind myself to update based on new information quickly.
All right, those are all the questions I have. Actually, I'd just like to let viewers know that if they'd like to know how to do a meditation, in addition to my book, Secular Meditation, I have free videos on my website, which is rickheller.com. That's RICKHELLER.com. And there are some videos which show the loving kindness meditation and also a breath meditation. So that's everything that I have to ask you, Gleb. I've been enjoying our conversation.
I really enjoyed that conversation too. And Rick and I agreed that at the end of our conversation, we'd share about what we learned from the conversation. So I think I learned some really interesting ways of thinking about how meditation and mindfulness can intersect with with sense of meaning and purpose in life. I haven't thought too much about loving kindness meditation as giving that sense of connection to others, but it really makes sense to me that that may be a way that people who are especially more introverted can prepare themselves to engage with more socially with others and help themselves gain a sense of meaning and purpose in that vein through engaging socially with others. So that's a specific thing that I think I will be thinking about more as I come away from this conversation and as I ponder further what other things to write about, that will help people gain a sense of meaning and purpose in life. And also the visualizations that Rick found interesting, that it sounds like I should be doing a little bit more work to describe those and to clarify to people how exactly I do them, because it sounds like that would be beneficial even for long-time meditators and practitioners like Rick. So those are a couple of things that I took away. What about you, Rick?
Well, your emphasis on community and is interesting. I mean, we certainly talk. It's called the Humanist Community at Harvard, so we certainly talk about community. But every person's sees things from behind their own eyes. And being, I said, somewhat introverted, I probably don't get as much reward from being in community as people who are more social, but I also maybe don't even appreciate that fact quite as much, because I enjoy a stroll by myself, and particularly when I in my book I talk about mindful hiking and mindful walking. When I actually do a meditation and then take a walk by myself afterward, I experience even just the sort of suburban area that I live in as to be very striking and very pleasurable. So I get a lot of enjoyment. I don't know if it's meaning exactly, but I certainly get a lot of enjoyment out of things that I do by myself. But it certainly is a good reminder of the diversity of people, and and that's actually one of the reasons. It's one of the things I actually say in the book is how different meditations I think work better for different people. I do find that when I come across other meditation instructions, either from other books or I've gone to places where I've learned meditation, oftentimes they present a single type of meditation as if one size fits all. And definitely, some people breath meditation works, and some people actually like what I do, mindfulness of ambient sound meditation, something that works for a lot of people. But the idea of connecting with community is something that is not for me. It's somewhat of a challenge for me, actually. For a while, actually, after I told you I grew up in a religious household. Then I became politically active, but then after a while, I became frustrated with politics and kind of really felt like a sort of atomized individual without really a lot of connections to anyone. I mean, I had friends, but I didn't have any, you might say, larger community that I felt I belonged to. And it was actually connecting with the humanist community about 8 years ago was very helpful to me, because one of the things I do find with community is that you can start to get to know people who you don't initially necessarily have amazing chemistry with, but you sort of get to know them over a period of time, and you develop the social bond slowly, but eventually you do develop those bonds. Probably people who are more extroverted actually do get those rewards quicker, and it works better for them. But so it's something that I will reflect on further. So thanks.
Okay, great, Rick. And thank you for sharing what you learned. And again, this was a conversation between Rick Keller of the of the humanist community of Harvard, who published Secular Meditations. Check it out in a local bookstore, in a local fine bookstore, or online. And Gleb Sapursky of Intentional Insights. We focused on my book, Find Your Purpose Using Science, which is available at the Intentional Insights website, intentionalinsights.org, or on Amazon at any time you want to visit it. So again, Intentional Insights is an organization that helps people reach their goals using science-based methods that empower people to improve their thinking, feelings, and behaviors. And I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.